Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters, and welcome to the House of Wisdom nightly Ramadan program. Tonight is a special night. We will have our nightly lecture from Sayyidina Abathar and Brother Jalal. And tonight is also an interfaith gathering for our Christian and Catholic and other faith will be here joining us tonight. So without any further ado, please help me to welcome Sayyidina Abathar and Brother Jalal من بعد الصلوات على محمد وآل محمد.
Please recite three loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الذي جعلنا من المتمسكين بولاية سيدي ومولاي علي بن أبي طالب. والحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. In the name of God, the most beneficent, the most merciful, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to send His greatest peace and blessings upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all the blessings He has given us. And the greatest blessing being that He allowed us to be of the ones who remain steadfast, dedicated and loyal on the path of our master after the Prophet, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. We praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this blessing and every blessing, for without Allah we would have nothing. Assalamu alaikum, dear respected brothers and sisters, wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Over the course of the next 3 nights, inshallah, we will be discussing building our relationships in our daily engagements. And we will focus on inspirational words and advice from the Immaculates, specifically and particularly in this situation, Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam, and his advice from a very well-known treatise that he put together, the Treatise of Rights, Risalat al-Huquq, where he goes through different individuals, different people, ourselves, and talks about the different rights and obligations that we have towards others, starting first and foremost with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now very quickly, how many of you have heard of Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam? Most of us, right? Alhamdulillah, that's excellent. Now Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam, for some of the younger ones that maybe didn't hear his name or don't know much about him, is our 4th Imam. Our first Imam is Imam Ali alayhi salam, then we have Imam Hassan alayhi salam, Imam Hussein, and Imam Zayn al-Abidin. So Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam is the son of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, who is the grandson of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Now Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam played a very significant role in the history of Islam. And he's most notably known for leading a spiritual revolution after the martyrdom of his father, Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Because at the time, after Imam Hussein alayhi salam was slaughtered on the land of Karbala, most people, a lot of the people during that time had or were in this type of spiritual coma. They did not have the conscious and awareness to do the right thing, to stand for the truth. So Imam Zayn alayhi salam tried to revive this conscious and spirit in people to do the right thing and stand for the truth. So Jalal, the Imam alayhi salam, is known for this particular work of art, truly, which is the Treatise of Rights. What is the significance of that book?
So when we're looking at this book that the Imam alayhi salam put together. He was examining the different rights of the different creatures of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of God, and examining the relationship between us, our body parts, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with our relationship with God, with the people around us, our family members, and everyone else that you could possibly think of that you could have a relationship with. A neighbor, a partner, a business companion, anyone you could possibly think of. There are about 51 different rights that this Imam outlines in this treatise of his. Now, when we're referring to this spiritual revolution that Imam Ali Zayn al-Abidin, the son of Hussein ibn Ali, came forward with, and the Sayyid mentioned briefly that it was at a time where people were in a spiritual coma, if you could say. The emphasis that the Imam placed on supplications, one, having compiled a book which we know today as As-Sahifa As-Sajjadiyya. If you've never picked up this book is extremely important. It allows us to navigate all the different situations, feelings, emotions, and states of mind that we could be in, and how to properly speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now we open up the Quran and we see the revelation. We take the revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And at times we feel we need to speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and describe to Him how we're feeling, what kind of situation we're in. This book outlines that. That's one book, right? Sahifa Sajadiyya. One of the supplications that we've been supplicating at the end of every presentation on a nightly basis has been Dua Abi Hamza Thamali, which is one that truly goes through so many different diverse feelings that we have, and going into so much vivid detail in the way we speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, when we're going to be focusing on these few rights in this treatise of rights, it's important for us to realize that it's part of this whole theme, this whole series that we've been doing for the past 11 or 12 nights, being that pursuit of a better me. We can't pursue a better me, a better us collectively, unless we realize our rights upon one another, ultimately Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's right upon us, and the way we need to deal with one another in our relationships. So inshallah, just that as a general overview, we're going to jump right into specifying some of the rights that the Imam outlines in this Risalat al-Huquq, being the treatise on rights.
Now, dear brothers and sisters, when we look at our life, we find that it is truly comprised of various relationships that we have. And most importantly, the most important relationship that we have is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the treatise of rights, Risalat al-Huquq, the Imam outlines the rights that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has upon us. What are the obligations that we have towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So the relationships start with the most important one at the highest level, at the greatest level, which is our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then from there are priorities in terms of the relationships, whether it's with our parents, our family members, our siblings, our friends, our acquaintances, the people that we go to school with, the people that we work with. So the Imam in this treatise of rights looks at all these relationships and talks about the rights and obligations that are mutual. Now, Jalal, in all of these relationships, what is the common denominator or the principle that the Quran gives us in dealing with relationships, particularly with the people around us, not with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God gives us a beautiful verse in the Quran, which outlines our relationship and our dealing with everyone around us, with all different types of walks of life. How do we look at the people around us? God tells us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Holy Quran, He says, O men, or O people, surely we have created of you male and female, and made you tribes and families so that you may get to know one another. Surely the most honorable of you with God is the one amongst you who is the most careful of his duty. Surely God is knowing, aware. Now when we look at this verse, we see what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what God gives us, is a way of living in our diversity, allowing us and telling us to not only accept our diversity, but to make it a part of our life and to get to know one another. Realize that we have differences. Realize that we are unique. realize that we are diverse. But that is the beauty and the creation of God, that He's made us this way for a certain purpose. So He's telling us, you're different, you're unique, you're coming from different families and backgrounds and ethnicities and nationalities. Realize you have these differences, but guess what? These differences are good for you. So get to know one another. Imagine we were in a place where we're all the same. There'd be no fun in it, right? But look at this blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us. He's making us different. He's allowing us and telling us we're coming from different backgrounds. Look at that blessing, take it, and get to know one another.
Now, after listening to the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Holy Quran, we go to the words of the Immaculates, because what the Immaculates do is they take the principles of the Quran and then they give us the daily application. Imam Ali alayhi salam, the commander of the faithful, wrote a letter to Malik al-Ashtar, who was the governor of Egypt. And what the Imam alayhi salam was attempting to do, he gave Malik advice on how he can run and establish a very effective and coherent government. So he tells him in that letter, and this is a very well-renowned quote that is known on the behalf of Imam alayhi salam. He tells Malik al-Ashtar that when you look at people, whether it's your constituents, the people that are under your authority, or outsiders, always remember that there are two types of people. That people are of two kinds. Either your brother in faith, or your equal in humanity. Now the significance of this is that there's no third option. There's two options. When you're engaging with other people, that other person that you're engaging with, whether it's a him or her, is either your brother or sister in faith. They share the same religious principles and values as you, or if they're not, then they're your equal in humanity. And this goes back and elaborates on the verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the standard that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala applies when He looks at people is based on their piety, their righteousness, their right conduct. Not where you come from, not your ethnicity, not the country that you come from, not your education background, not your economic status. So on that point, Jalal, this whole concept of Imam alayhi salam telling us that when you're looking at people, treat them either as your brother in faith or sister in faith, or your equal in humanity. How does that translate in our daily interactions and engagements with other people nowadays?
So we see that we go to work, we go to school, we have ourselves as our neighbors, our friends, our community. We're diverse, especially here in our country as Americans in the United States. We're a diverse community, and we have people of all different kinds around us. Now, by our principles established by Islam, established by our faith, through the words of God, God is telling us, no matter what background someone is coming from, you can't place a judgment on someone simply because they come from a different background than you. In fact, and furtherance with what the Imam alayhi salam said in giving that advice to his governor, was that you have to treat people of only two kinds. Either your brother in faith, or your sister in faith, or your equal in humanity. Meaning what? We don't have any sense of I'm better than you or you're better than me. The only sense of judgment that we have is where God is placing that judgment, and that judgment is in His eyes. Not for you and I to come and judge one another. Our responsibility, our obligation as neighbors, as community members, as people of the same faith and people of other faiths, is to treat each other with respect, with tolerance, and a seeking to understand one another. And that's the essence of that verse, that we want to seek to understand and learn more about one another. Now on that note, we see that this treatise on rights, that Imam Ali Zayn al-Abidin, the fourth Imam, he talks to the different rights that we have. And we're going to jump into one very interesting right that this Imam actually talks about. The right of the individual that is kind towards you. Now imagine how specific that is. The right of the individual that is kind towards you, that does an act that is kind towards you. He says, the right of him who does a kindly act, what would be in Arabic as ma'ruf, towards you is the one that you thank him. You mention his kindness. You reward him with beautiful words. And you supplicate for him sincerely in that which is between you and God. So look at that. The person that just does something kind towards you, the Imam is telling you that the right of him upon you is that you supplicate for him. Not only you supplicate for him in private, but that you thank him and you commend him with beautiful words. So automatically, no matter who the person is, it's not that if someone of my own faith does something good to me, I'm going to thank them. No, if anybody of any faith, of any background, they can have a completely different faith and background than you, you thank them. You give them those beautiful words, those compliments, that you're such a good person. Thank you for giving me this kind act. Thank you for being so kind towards me. And not only that, not only in their face, but that you supplicate for them and you pray for them. And we see this especially in this holy month, as we're fasting, as we're bringing ourselves closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, closer to God. We need to be aware of the relationships we have with people. Because if we're not mindful of our relationships with people, we're automatically going to be heedless of the ultimate goal that we have as individuals, as outlined by that verse, where God is telling us, I've created you from different backgrounds so that you may get to know one another. Now furthermore, the Imam continues and he says, if you do that, if you pray for this person, you have thanked him in secret and openly. Then if you are able to repay him one day with the same deed, then do so. Now, Sayyid, when we're looking at this, we mentioned this relationship that we have with one another and the importance of being attentive to what other individuals do for us in kind acts. Now, how does that connect us back to that relationship that we have with God?
Now, whenever we think about what others are offering us, what others are doing for us, the kind things that they do for us, we have to be reminded that when we are thankful to others for the things that they have given us, we have to thank first and foremost God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the reason is because everything is inspired from Him. Even that person that gives you whatever it is that they are offering for you, all of that is inspired by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, there's a verse in the Holy Quran that is truly very universal, and it applies to all faiths and people from all walks of life, where God says that He gives us all that we ask for. And then He continues and says that if we attempt to count the favors of God, that we will never be able to number them. And I will claim that this is a principle that's universal, that doesn't only apply in the religion of Islam or to Muslims, which is that God truly gives us when we supplicate and worship Him with that sincere intention, that He is there and He will offer us and He will bless us with His bounties. And that when we try to assess and count what these different favors are, we will never be able to count and assess all of that, because His blessings shower us in an infinite way, especially during the holy month of Ramadan. And He says in another verse that when we thank Him, that He will give us more. And on that point, it's very important when we're talking about this whole concept and notion of thanking God, that a lot of times when we want to thank Him, we have to thank the instruments and tools in this life that He provides that do good towards us. And those are the people that are around us that Jalal was referring to when they do kind acts towards us. Now, on that point, the Imam also talks about the rights of the adversary who has a claim against us. What does he say about that?
So we looked at people that are being kind towards us. Now look at the people that, we kind of conflict with. We all have different problems that take place within our community, outside of our community, with our community members, people outside of our community members, and we have adversaries. And when we're looking at this, it's not necessarily looking at an enemy, but it's looking at somebody that you have a conflict with, that there are two interests, and you're on one side of those interests. So the Imam is telling us, in the situation where you're having someone that you're at conflict with, and they have a claim against you, look at what right that this individual has against you. So the Imam says the right of the adversary who has a claim against you is that if what he claims against you is true, so look at this, if what he claims against you is true, then you give witness to it against your own self. So if what this person is claiming, no matter what, even if it's at your own risk, at your own stake of you losing that interest that's involved, if what he's saying is true, then you have to be a witness against your own self. Now, this is interesting when we're looking at our own legal system. We have the whole idea of self-incrimination, right? We have that right against self-incrimination, completely fair. But the Imam is telling you of your moral conduct. If you're having a private matter with somebody, right? And you have a conflict situation, you know you're wrong, then you have to say you're wrong. You know that that person has a right against you, you have to be witness to that right. And this goes hand in hand with a narration by his grandfather, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, where he says, you know the truth, then you'll know its people. So if we seek to understand what truth is, then we'll be able to identify the people of truth. And this is very relevant for us today, because when we're looking at different faiths and different backgrounds, there's always going to be extremists. There's always going to be people that take the name of faith, the name of God into their own hands and do the worst of things. The importance for us to do, the importance for us is to look at all of these faiths, all of these beautiful faiths that are seeking towards going to Allah, going to God. And essentially the word in Arabic, Allah, that Muslims say, simply means God. When we're looking at this, we have to realize how important it is for us not to look at the people that would be considered to be extremists, taking the faith, whatever faith it may be, into their own hands, but rather looking at the principles of the faith itself. Does the principle of the faith itself say to do these acts? No, they don't. When we see these crimes taking place, we know all of our faiths stand against atrocities and injustice and oppression. And the significance is for us to realize we have to know the truth so we know its people. Instead of looking at people that are taking it in their own hands, we have to learn about the faith itself, right? And that goes to ourselves, our responsibility as Muslims. If we look at our brothers and sisters from the Christian faith, from the Jewish faith, from the Hindu faith, from any other faith, from the Buddhist faith, whatever it may be, if you don't understand them, you don't understand why they practice, learn about them. And I encourage our brothers and sisters from all different types of faiths to learn about us as well. And that's the importance here, seeking to understand and learning about one another. If we do that, we will be able to go over so many different barriers that we face in our communities, from the smallest things to the biggest things as well.
And on that note, Imam Ali Zain al-Abidin, who is one of the disciples of Islam and the grandson of Prophet Muhammad, continues when he talks about this right. And he says that even when a person is false, listen to this. He says, even when a person is false, show kindness towards them and show nothing but kindness. So when you're dealing with someone and someone comes and says that they have a certain claim against you, in that situation, you have to have open ears. You listen to that person in a very civil and respectful way, and you see what they have to say. Then you assess. If they have a right, if they're truthful in what they say, you fulfill that right towards them. You fulfill that obligation. But the Imam says here very importantly that even when they're false, even if it's a false claim, it doesn't give you the justification to reject them or be intolerant towards them or disrespect them, but rather you treat them with kindness and nothing but kindness, which shows the scope of the mercy that we should have when we're engaging with other people, even people that might conflict with us, even people that might come and make false accusations and false claims, because that's the only way we could live together and promote a civil life where we're engaging with each other and be able to progress and advance with one another as a community.
Now, looking beyond this whole idea of adversaries, where the Imam is telling us someone who has a right against you, then someone has a right against you, you stand with truth even if it's against you, even if it's against your interests. And if you have a right against somebody, then you always deal with that person in moderation and a polite nature, like the Sayyid was mentioning. Now, beyond that, we look at something very practical as well, in dealing in business, right? The Imam talks about partners, specifically. He says, the right of your partner in work. So this could be applied to employees, that we're co-employees, we're working together in a business, or we have our own business, or we're leading the business as either project managers or people that were co-owners of the institution itself. The Imam says, in this situation, the right of the partner is that if he should be absent. So you're looking at the absence of the partner. So if he is absent, you suffice him in his affairs. And if he is present, you show regard for him. You make no decision without his decision. And you do nothing on the basis of simply your own opinion, but instead you exchange views and opinions with him. So the emphasis here is what? When you're dealing and working with people, you're supposed to ask them their opinion. You're supposed to engage with them. It's not about just doing it my way or the highway. The Imam is telling us here a significant principle in our dealings with one another, especially in our business, especially in our work, in our professional conduct. We're looking at the ethics here of professional conduct, essentially. He's telling us you deal with one another, you exchange with one another, and you regard one another. You place importance on the other person's opinion. So even if it's something that you feel that you made a decision on, you still should consult the individual that is your partner, that is your employee, that is your person doing work with, and see what they have to say about the matter as well.
And he continues in that light talking about that relationship which is between the partners in work. Now, nowadays when we apply this in a very practical way, it's beyond the traditional business where there are partners. Now you have corporations and LLCs, and even on a non-business level where you have, for example, a government agency or non-profit organization. In all of these institutions, when there's people working with each other and should be promoting each other's interests and looking out for each other, these principles apply. He says that with that partner that you're engaging with, you guard his property for him. And you do not betray him in that of his affair, which is difficult or of little importance. For God's hand is above the heads of the two partners as long as they do not betray each other. And this is a very practical example that he's talking about here, which is betrayal. That when you're working with someone, and you should be working for the same goal and promoting the same interest, that in that situation, even when the other person might not have his eye open to certain things that you do, and even though you might have the power to do certain things, that you should be principled to try to promote the interest of both individuals. And not just because someone gives you his back that you betray them and stab them. And this actually brings a very common example. I remember in my corporate law class, on the first day, the professor was introducing the class, and he told us that in all these cases that you read, where basically it's always a conflict, either between partners or directors or the shareholders and directors, that a lot of times a common problem, the common denominator is what? Greed. But the Imam here is telling us what? That when we're dealing with these people, greed should not be the driving principle behind our actions. It should be principles and doing the right thing that promotes the interests of everyone around us.
And we see it whether it be in the field of law or business, finance, whatever it may be, you're always going to see these themes. And it comes down to that professional conduct and that ethics that we have. And when we look at the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, he is the one who came and said that I have only come to perfect the best of ethics. That was his mission, to perfect the best of ethics. Looking at ethics, the way we look at ourselves, the way we look at other people, the way we deal with one another. Now, beyond this whole sense of partners and employees and our dealing with one another in our business and our work, we go to another practical right that the Imam speaks of in this treatise on rights. He says regarding the right of your neighbor. And this is something that I'll say for myself, I know I neglect. And sometimes, unfortunately, we go years upon years without even dealing directly with our neighbors and speaking to them and engaging with them simply because we feel that they're from a different background, they're from a different ethnicity, they're from a different religious belief. But the Imam tells us here, and notice actually in all of these rights, he doesn't say that this is your Muslim neighbor's right. This is your Muslim partner's right. This is your Muslim adversary's right. He's looking at the right of any individual that you're dealing with, any individual that you're engaging with in your community. Because the principles of the faith here are established knowing that with the first verse that we mentioned from the very beginning, that God has created us as different people, different backgrounds, different ethnicities, and different people and tribes and groups for a reason, so that we may get to know one another and engage with one another. So regarding the specific right, the Imam goes on and he says, the right of your neighbor is that you guard him when he is absent. You honor him when he is present. And you aid him when he is wronged. You do not pursue anything that is that shameful. You do not pursue anything of his that is shameful. If you know of any evil of him, you conceal it. Now, unfortunately, sometimes as soon as we know something negative about our neighbors, we're the first to go out and tell our other neighbors about it, right? We start talking and say, oh, did you hear about Ali? Did you hear about Bob? Did you hear about Junior? What happened the other week? And we start talking to different people in our community and our neighbors about what's going on, the negative things that are going on. But the Imam specifically here is telling us, if you want to truly attach yourself to the principles of your faith, you need to realize what? That if you are going to be a good person, if you're going to be a good human, you need to protect your neighbor, regardless of what background he comes from, regardless if they agree with your religious or even political beliefs. You need to protect your neighbor and be there for them when they're in front of you, when they're present, or even when they're absent. You become a guard for them. You become a protector for them and their rights. Now say, what else does the Imam tell us specifically about this right of our neighbor? Because there's so many things that the Imam tells us regarding these individuals and people's rights upon us and the way we need to deal with one another.
Now we'll conclude with this note where the Imam examines this relationship of the neighbor. He continues and says that if you know that your neighbor will not accept your counsel, you counsel him in that which is between you and him, on a private level, in a private manner, not before other people where you could embarrass him. He also continues and says that you do not forsake him in difficulty. You release him from his stumble, you forgive his sin, and you associate with him generously. And there is no strength save in God. And there's a principle here that's very important, that applies in our relationships with our neighbors, but also extends beyond. This whole concept and notion of forgiving other people's sins. We have to be realistic. We live with people, we associate with people, and at times, relationships might go downhill. A person might harm me in one way or another, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. In those situations, we shouldn't just jump to judging the other person and taking a stance that could destroy and be detrimental to the relationship. If there is a situation where I can be initiating and salvage the problem and end the conflict and be able to bridge the gaps, then I should seek that. I should be proactive and go after that. Because we're not here to create enemies with one another. We're not here to create conflicts with one another. Even when we see a conflict, even when someone else might be harming us in one way or another, let's be the better person. As the Immaculate ﷺ are telling us, be the better person. Be the person that takes that step to try to bridge the problems and end the conflicts. Not someone that fuels the fire, as they say, or adds more fuel to the fire. So we're running out of time and we wanted to be brief here. We just wanted to outline very basic relationships that we have as we're coming here together in light of this very important event, and see how we could learn from some of the wise individuals that are in the religion of Islam that propagated universal principles that apply to Muslims and non-Muslims. And when they were talking about rights that we have with other people and obligations towards other people, they always mentioned, even before the Muslims, the non-Muslims, because there's a greater universal principle that brings us and allows us to work together for. Now we'll conclude with a few verses from a supplication, and we've been doing this every night as a honorable tradition in these holy nights of Ramadan. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
And brothers and sisters, just to emphasize, and I'm saying brothers and sisters not only to the Muslims attending here, but to our non-Muslim brothers and sisters as well. the emphasis here and the universal theme that we have is that we're all trying to be good individuals. And looking at this principle that Imam Ali alayhi salam mentioned, to know the truth and you'll know its people. So if we're all seeking that truth, we know that the emphasis here is what? That we deal with one another respectfully. That we don't compromise our beliefs. Everyone has a right to their beliefs. And that's actually one of the beautiful things of this country that we live in as Americans. That we live in this country where you don't have to compromise your beliefs for anyone. You can believe whatever you want to believe. However, the emphasis here is what? That we treat one another with respect and we seek to learn and understand one another and deal with one another in a way that we would like to be treated. Our neighbor, our partner in work, our friends, our community members, anyone that you know and everyone that you don't know. Dealing with that respect and treating people simply the way you would like to be treated. What we teach our kids in school, we apply to ourselves. If we don't understand something about one another, let's seek to understand. Let's open the doors of dialogue. That's the most important thing here. And we're emphasizing again, God created us different for a reason, so that we can learn and get to know one another. So off of that note, we'll go into the supplication where we're speaking to God in this holy month and seeking that relationship with Him to become closer to Him so that we can know ourselves better and know Him better ultimately as well.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد يا ربي إن لنا فيك أملا طويلا كثيرا إن لنا فيك رجاء عظيما.
O my Lord, we have a greater and everlasting hope in you. We have a greater and everlasting hope in you as we anticipate prolonged and immense prospect in you. We anticipate great desire in you.
عصيناك ونحن نرجو أن تستر علينا ودعوناك ونحن نرجو أن تستجب لنا فحقق رجاءنا مولانا.
And we disobeyed you, and now we wish that you protect our secrets and our sins. We prayed to you and hope you would answer us. So fulfill our aspiration, O my Master.
فقد علمنا ما نستوجب بأعمالنا ولكن علمك فينا وعلمنا بأنك لا تصرفنا عنك حثنا على الرغبة إليك.
For otherwise we realize that the punishment we deserve as a result of our bad deeds. But your awareness of our conduct and our knowledge that you indeed won't send us away from you has motivated us to seek you.
وإن كنا غير مستوجبين لرحمتك فأنت أهل أن تجود علينا وعلى المذنبين بفضل إيساتك.
And even though we are not worthy of your mercy, you are worthy of bestowing your generosity on us, all of us who are sinners, due to your vast compassion. So award us what you are worthy of, my Lord.
فمن علينا بما أنت أهله وجد علينا فإنا محتاجون إلى نيلك.
So award us with what you are worthy of, my Lord, and grant us what we are in need of in your bounty.
يا غفار بنورك اهتدينا وبفضلك استغنينا وبنعمتك أصبحنا وأمسينا.
O most forgiving, with your light we are guided. With your light we are guided, and with your bounties we become richer, and with your favors we are encountered morning and evening.
Dear brothers and sisters, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we ask God as a collective group in all of our different languages and coming from different faiths and with different supplications for universal principles such as to bless us, to protect us, to forgive our sins, and to allow us to come together as a greater community to serve a greater cause that will help all of us to progress and advance together. We thank you, and we will conclude with sending blessings on the Prophet and his household. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.